a time of disruption, how COVID-19 is driving innovation. We're pleased that you can spend part of your Friday with us, and I think the next 90 minutes will be fun and engaging and worthwhile for you. In a minute, I will ask our three panelists to introduce themselves and their organizations and give us a glimpse into their backgrounds and experiences. But I do have an advantage over most of you because last year I wrote a book that included these three remarkable entrepreneurs. They will be known to you today as Brenna Berman, who's the CEO and Executive Director of City Tech Collaborative, and Jean Brownhill, who's the founder and CEO of Sweden, and then Brent Grinnen, who is the CEO and founder of Evertrue. But they will forever be known to me as chapters 17, 18, and 19 of Innovation on Tap. And Brenna, Jean, and Brent were each willing to take a cold call from an unknown person, an unknown author, who didn't even have his publisher yet, and spend time sharing their stories with me as a favor, knowing there might never be any payoff at all. I think it's an object lesson in how you build community, which is one of the underlying themes of the book. And it gives you a glimpse into why the three of them are so successful. So Innovation on Tap is a history of entrepreneurship in America over 3 centuries. It starts with Eli Whitney and his cotton gin in 1794, and it goes all the way up to, I guess, Disney Plus and Lin-Manuel Miranda and Hamilton not so long ago. And the book is set in a virtual barroom where both living entrepreneurs on the right side of your screen and the not so living entrepreneurs can come together to share stories and compare their experiences. And they can also drink. So in between chapters, there's kind of a running conversation that goes on. It's like having a Greek chorus, but with alcohol included. So as I began my research, I thought it would be a good idea to define the concept of entrepreneur. There are a bunch of definitions out there, but I thought I needed to pick one and just be consistent throughout the book. And to do that, I thought, why not hire a bouncer, someone who could check IDs at the door and make sure only real entrepreneurs get into the conversation. So for that role, I chose Joseph Schumpeter, who was an Austrian economist who wrote an important treatise on entrepreneurs in 1911. And then in the 1930s, he crossed the Atlantic. He came over to teach at Harvard until his death in 1950. And he wrote about what he called the perfect gale of creative destruction that successful entrepreneurs inevitably leave in their wakes. Creative destruction, that's his term. And if you read Schumpeter, and it's not always that easy to do, but you realize he has a particular order of events in mind when he's thinking about innovation and entrepreneurship. You find an opportunity, you create or innovate a solution, you implement. The doing part is really important. And in the process, you often destroy the older thing. So it's creative destruction, but creation comes first. And then in 1997, Clay Christensen offered us this hugely influential innovative dilemma and wrote about what he called disruptive innovation. And so over the next generation, 2 things happen. One is Schumpeter's destruction kind of morphs into Christensen's disruption, which I think is a better term. It's kinder and gentler than to destroy something. But second, entrepreneurs begin putting disruption in the lead position ahead of creation. And for the last 2 decades, entrepreneurs have been on a quest to find tired old products or services or companies or sometimes entire industries and just kind of blow them up. So fast forward to today, and the world has changed for all of us. Just look around. If you're an entrepreneur, much of the work of blowing stuff up has been done for you. It seems like everything has been disrupted, right? How we work, how we shop, how we provide healthcare and religious services and education and fitness and entertainment. So if the disruption has already been done for us, then maybe it's time again to create. And maybe we have to create like mad just to catch up with the disruption. That's kind of the premise of today's panel. Times are hard for all of us, but the number one quality of entrepreneurs is perseverance. And that's just slightly ahead of optimism. So in the creative destruction equation, we are encouraged today to put equation back in the lead. Okay, so with that introduction, you now have permission, to go get a cold beverage and sip it during our presentation. But I'm going to hand the program over to Brenna Berman, who is really the brainchild of this panel. So special thanks to her. We'll ask Brenna to share her background and describe the work of her organization, and then she'll pass that over to Jean Brownhill, who will do the same, and then pass it to Brent, who will eventually return it to me, and we'll start the conversation. We have reserved time at the end for Q&A, so if you have a question, please just type it into the Zoom Q&A area. So now I'm going to relinquish the screen and welcome Brenna.
Thanks, Eric, and good morning, everybody. It's really exciting to be here. My name is Brenna Berman. I'm the CEO of a Chicago-based organization called CityTech, and we're an urban accelerator that brings together organizations that range from large corporations like Microsoft to tiny startups, government organizations, and community organizations that work together to solve city problems that really are too big for any one organization to take on by themselves. We really focus on a co-innovation process that focuses on bringing together solutions that are scalable and maintainable over time to break that process that's been plaguing cities of what I call the tyranny of pilots, where you do find something that does work, but then there's really no way to sustain that over time so that you're ensured of a maintainable process to really bring solutions to residents that they can rely on and that they've had a voice in creating. We work in areas that range from mobility and last mile innovation to infrastructure, all the way to equity and the digital divide to homelessness. And while we're based in Chicago, we do work all over the country. Jean, over to you. Oh, Jean, I think you're still on mute.
This is like the Zoom faux pas. Thank you for letting me know. Hello, everyone. I was just saying thank you for joining us today. Really excited to be part of this conversation. My name is Jean Brownhill. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Sweeten. Sweeten matches home renovation projects with thoroughly vetted general contractors, and we offer expert advice, platform tools, and financial protections at no additional cost to the homeowner, so that we can support your renovation project all the way from start to finish. My background is in architecture. I worked in architecture for almost a decade before founding this company, so I both know the industry side of the equation really well, but also experienced the challenge of renovating when I bought a house in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and was really excited to renovate it. Ended up hiring the wrong general contractor and had an experience that so many people that don't have a multi-million-dollar budget have, which is a really, really challenging time finding a great general contractor and then, more importantly, successfully working with them. So we are based out of New York City, but we do serve Chicago. We love Chicago. I was there a lot last year, and I can't wait to be able to travel again to be able to come back. Right, and I hand it over to my colleague, Brent.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jean. Thanks, Eric, for facilitating the conversation. I'm Brent Grinna, founder and CEO of Evertrue. Evertrue is a Boston-based company that is one of the leading providers of software for the higher education fundraising sector. So if you think about the college, alumni relations, and development space, most of you have experience with that in some regard. Around $50 billion is raised every year to support colleges. And that matters a lot to me because I grew up in Iowa and really aspired to be a first-generation college student. I was fortunate to get recruited by Brown University to play football, ended up serving as captain of the team, and really had a life-changing experience that was supported by philanthropy, but also by the access to an incredible alumni network who collectively took me under their wings and coincidentally led me to Chicago. So I spent my first 4 years after college at William Blair & Company and Madison Dearborn Partners. But outside of work, I got very involved with Brown as a volunteer leader. And in doing that, I was really struck by both the passion and connectivity that people had around their collegiate experience, but at the same time, the tools and technologies used to both connect us to one another, but also support the fundraising process were in some cases decades out of date. And so I started the company specifically after serving as a volunteer for my 5th reunion fundraising campaign. I named it Evertrue, which is the fight song that plays when the football team scores touchdowns, which I did one time my junior year against Dartmouth, and the rest is history. So we're about 10 years in, based in Boston, working with several hundred colleges and universities around the country, and very excited to have this conversation at a time when our sector is under tremendous pressure on a variety of fronts. I'm going to kick it back to Eric.
Great, thanks. There's so much more I could tell you about those stories. So much more. They're fascinating stories. We have 3 children. I made them all read their stories so that they would know sort of what some of these paths were. But, okay, question number 1. The world has changed dramatically just in the last few months, since March. And I have a Twitter account, which is probably a bad idea, but there was some observer on Twitter who noted that we are facing the pandemic of 1918, the depression of 1930, and the unrest of 1968, but all at the same time. And then I saw CNN report that there's a squirrel in Colorado with bubonic plague, but we'll just leave that to the side for now. So I wanted to kind of ask our panelists in general, and Jean, I'll start with you. Just talk about the forces that are out there that have changed the way you've had to do business. How have you been able to keep your team focused and in sync, and maybe a little bit about how your relationships with customers or partners or your clients have changed.
Yeah. So just, high level for myself and the team, I think it was important to remind ourselves that the end of the world has been predicted many times. It has not happened. And just like keeping that squarely in our sights, and as that related to our business specifically, we have a platform, an online platform that facilitates an offline transaction. And so when shelter in place went into effect in the majority of the cities that we operate in, so in LA, in Chicago, in New York, Atlanta, and Miami to some extent, that meant that all of our construction projects came to a grinding halt. Like our business within the course of, I would say, a week went from processing thousands of renovations to processing almost none. And that is, of course, an incredibly scary moment for our staff, for our general contractors, for our homeowners who might have been in all different stages of their renovation. But we had to hold back to the idea, as I said, that the end of the world has not come yet. This will not be the end of the world. People will still live in houses. People will still want to renovate those houses. We will get back to business, and to really take this opportunity to invest in the things that will stabilize us now as a company, and that certainly included some cost-cutting measures and some reallocation of funds from my seat, but then really looking for opportunities of how can we invest now so that we can thrive later. And of course, no one wants to think about COVID as having any silver linings, because when hundreds of thousands of people are dying, when so many people are losing their jobs and suffering, it would be, and mind you, I also lost like a personal dear friend to COVID, so I really take it extremely seriously. But I did think it was important that we look for the opportunities that this moment presented us. And so for us, that meant the fast forwarding of the future of construction. I believe, and we see, that our general contractors are now willing and open to using technology solutions that they were not open to using before this happened. We believe that we're probably 3 to 5 years now. We've been fast forwarded into the future as it relates to construction technology, and we're taking advantage of that opportunity. So I think that that's at least how we did it. I found myself saying a lot to the team, great players are made in the off season, and this is a terrible off season, but we need to be in the gym. We need to be lifting weights. We need to be eating right in this moment, to extend the analogy, to make sure that we come out stronger on the other side. That's how we did it.
Great. Thank you, Jean. Brent, you're on mute. Okay.
Yeah. I was thinking about this kind of internally, externally, short-term, long-term. And so the immediate reaction was internal short-term, where, we, at the beginning of this year, we were doing things like debating, should we allow more flexible work from home policies, and what are the pros and cons, and all of the time we spent debating that. To Eric's point, well, that decision was made for us in the course of 24 to 48 hours, and so then we went into this short-term internal reactivity mode, which was let's get people out of the office. Let's do our part to try to mitigate the spread, which happened overnight in Boston, very, very unprepared. And so we were on the early wave of tech companies that quickly said work from home. Initially, I think we said we would reevaluate every Friday, and that 2 weeks from that day we would reassess. And needless to say, it's Friday, and we're not exactly reevaluating at this moment. But what that did was then thrust us into a remote environment at a time that we were unprepared. As a leader, I have always been, office culture, good vibes, like read the room, love running into people in at the coffee machine, grab people for an impromptu lunch. And so all of that was shut down overnight as well. And I will tell you, and I'm sure some of you experienced it, all of a sudden flipping what was previously a really high energy, in-person, laughter, good vibes, all hands meeting to a bunch of Zoom boxes, and trying to read the room and trying to understand how is what I'm saying being perceived by my team. That was a real challenge. And so some of the short-term internal things that we started doing were, on a personal level, I started surveying the team on a weekly basis, trying to understand anonymously, letting people ask questions that when I would typically do a town hall, all hands meeting in person, I'd say things like, does anyone have any questions? And no one would ask a question. Well, they all had questions. They just weren't necessarily comfortable sharing publicly in that forum. And so by introducing things like surveys anonymously, it allowed people to surface issues that in some cases predate COVID, but in other circumstances are absolutely linked to COVID. And at the beginning, all everybody wanted to know was, am I getting laid off? And so being able to understand those concerns, not overstate my position, because like Jean, we've all got to make hard decisions, so you can't sugarcoat something at a time like this. But that was just a big shift. How do you communicate with the team when you're so used to doing it in one way? So that was sort of short-term internal. I think what that means internal long-term is our view on work remote sure has evolved a lot. And our view on where we can recruit people now that we are starting to recruit again. We've just hired 3 people this week, one in Washington, D.C., one in Atlanta, and the other one is in Minneapolis. And unlikely that 9 months ago we would have done that, or it would have been a huge debate about whether we should really hire somebody in a remote situation like that. And then external, right? We're serving the higher education sector. We're helping them raise money to support kids like me going to college. But we're at a time with a backdrop of a student loan crisis pre-COVID, of people questioning if you really should be paying $50,000 for an online education. And at the same time, our company's mission is to help those institutions get more money to be able to scale their offerings. And so there's tremendous disruption. Jean said 3 to 5 years in her sector. I'd say it's at least that in ours. And we're trying to weigh the short-term headlines about will college football be played this fall relative to the long-term question of do we need a college campus at a time of remote everything? So lots to learn. It's certainly been challenging, but perseverance and optimism are the name of the game. So we're going to try to keep that going. Sorry I went so long, Brenna.
Yeah, no, I think like Jean and Brent, I was balancing the disruption to my team with the disruption to our partners. So, if Jean and Brent were balancing the disruption to construction and higher ed, the disruption to our cities, which is the industry we work in, is I think going to be measured in decades and not any faster than that. And I think for my team, we worked very closely for years, except for we had a new guy who literally started February 15th. And had moved back from Africa to reconnect with close community in Chicago, which is where he had grown up, and all of a sudden is, sheltering in place by himself. So, learning how to listen and support, and because when you're working in a startup, you spend more time, frankly, with the people you work with than the people that, you might be living with in your family. So learning how to support and communicate a broad swath of people who might be, going through the challenges of having kids who are now at home while you're trying to work, to millennials who are living alone, sheltering in place with now almost no support system at all because there's no one else at home with them, and how you incorporate some sort of support model at work, because work is now not just a 9-to-5 job, not that any of ours ever were, but when you as a startup are such a mission-based, try and save the world, which in a lot of ways is how everyone on my team feels about what we do. It was creating enough space not just to hear out their concerns about work, which, ranged from, can we keep payroll going, to does our work matter anymore, or what is our work, right? The list of projects and initiatives that we were working on in February, you had to look at each and every one of them to see if they were relevant anymore. And it took us a while to figure out that about half of them were, and now, after about a month of evaluating them, 100% of our projects are relevant now, but some had to be put on the back burner and filled in with new things. And then thinking about our partners in the cities that we serve, their priorities changed significantly, right? Because everything pivoted to first to, how you positioned yourself to respond to the health crisis. And then a month later came, the racial justice crisis and the riots in many of our cities. So dealing with that became, a challenge as well. And now we are engaged in many of our cities around their recovery and reopening initiatives. So putting our team in sort of the double position to both be a support in their personal lives because of the important role that work plays in your overall health and well-being, and then frankly being that same partner to our partners in their overall health and well-being. And the way that we did that went back to basics around our mission, which has always been to help cities be happier, healthier, and more productive. And at the end of the day, that hasn't changed. The way we're doing that is slightly different, but that's still what cities are about. They might be focused on different priorities within that, but that is what cities still need to be for their residents. So that's what we're still helping cities do, and helping my team come back around to focus on that mission. I think, frankly, has given us all a little bit of sanity amidst all of the things that we're facing both individually and with our partners day to day.
Great, thanks. Jean, I'm so cognizant of when you look for optimistic or positives in the midst of a pandemic, I think your whole body language you have to be aware of what it is you do. You're expected to do that, but at the same time, we have to keep in mind that there's so much suffering going on out there. So I'm going to go off script a little bit here. Years ago when I was running Sensitech, we were venture backed. So like maybe some of you, we were always a quarter away from running out of money. And people in the company knew it. And I had just been promoted to CEO, and I think I was getting coffee one morning. I may have had a little fight with my wife, or I may have had a flu, or had a bad night's sleep. Someone said to me, "How are things going?" And I said, not so great this morning. And literally by lunchtime, the rumor was that we were going to be bankrupt. So I realized then that number one, my own personal mental health was important. And number two, I needed an outlet for it, or a sounding board, or some way to stay healthy. And I'm wondering, just if I could ask you three, I don't want to pry too much, but how do you stay in the context of what's gone on in the last 150 days? And you have to be up, but not too up, in terms, how do you stay mentally healthy? How are you doing it? And Jean, go ahead.
Well, first and foremost, I think one of the things that we're all talking about is just how important communication is in this moment. I mean, all of us, certainly as leaders, I have been over communicating with my team, having twice a week all stand meetings that we do not move or cancel, absolutely doing surveys, getting feedback, listening, and just, over communicating. You're absolutely right that sometimes you can communicate things that you are not intending to communicate. Things can be read in certain ways. And in this particular moment, I will just say that I have been so much more vulnerable with my team than I ever had before. I think I don't know if I've ever cried in a professional setting. That just wasn't one of the options for my career path. I have cried in front of my team. I have been so transparent with my own insecurities about this moment, but clear, as I said, of the moment, meaning this particular minute. But I also make sure that I communicate my long-term optimism, as I said, that we will be okay. That if there is a moment that you catch me that is off, I'm off because I'm a human being and I am experiencing all these things with you in real time. I am doing my best to process them and communicate them back to you quickly, but I am still a human being. And again, that over communication has been really helpful for me in this moment, so that I haven't had to sacrifice my own mental sanity, if that makes sense. It's too much weight. It's too hard. This moment is too hard for any one of us to be able to internalize and do it perfectly. And so better just to do it authentically than perfectly, at least for me in this moment. And then, so that's how I've communicated. And then just quickly, I will tell you the other thing that I've done is that I have been very protective of my time. And if it is not things that are directly related to my team, to my business, or to my own personal well-being, I have not taken them on in this moment. I have gotten a lot of requests in this moment for many different communities and groups that I'm a part of, and I've had to say no. I've had to be really, really protective of my time, my mental space, and my energy.
So we really appreciate you being with us today. Very much. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. This was a great conversation. Of course.
Brent?
My quick comment would be, whatever challenges you felt, that day that your team interpreted it as complete spiraling out of control or whatever, that's a huge challenge. And how do you be optimistic and at the same time be real? And I think one of the great things about some of the anonymous feedback I've received is one of my favorite comments is I've had a few people write, sometimes saying I don't know is the right answer, and just tell us that you don't know versus feeling like you need to have an answer, be able to spin anything into an answer. And so the flip side is I'm trying not to lean on that as too much of a crutch and just say I don't know about everything, but it is good to take people on the journey as opposed to pretending like you've totally got it all figured out. I'd say tactically we're doing some things like we've created a 1,000,000-step challenge over a 100-day period using whatever fitness tracker people use with the Amazon card you unlock at different levels, and just trying to encourage people to get away from the Zoom calls once in a while and make sure to get outside, get some fresh air, and again, need a lot of help in this regard. So if anybody has any ideas, I'd welcome it, but just trying to be sensitive of everything people are dealing with.
I will say I was probably not as protective of my time as Jean was early on, which is really insightful. And like a lot of people, I'm home with, kids who are going to school and trying to balance a number of things beyond, just work, as a lot of people were. And personally, for my escape, I'm a Peloton person, which I know carries a lot of connotations with it, but I'm maniacal about my half hour on that bike. For a while, I was getting out for a walk every day, but I'm down in Dallas at the moment, and it's way too hot for that now. So for me, that personal time of protecting that 30 minutes, and I do have a biking buddy, so sharing that time with someone and, nothing else to talk about, just getting some exercise and encouraging my team to take that time away. We did call a couple of mental health days early on of just, this Friday is off. There's nothing we're doing today that won't be here on Monday. And especially now in the summer months, encouraging people to take vacation time, even if they can't use it to go anywhere, which is quite challenging right now. To get that time away, to protect their mental sanity and health space, and get that time with their family and friends in whatever way is healthy and safe for them to do that, to make sure that they can continue to sort of bring their value to the table and the family and their jobs. Because it's hard to protect that vacation time when you're not actually stepping out of the house.
Yeah, agreed. You all, I can also all see you smiling every so often, despite everything that's going on. So I know a sense of humor. I know that Brent posted I played the guitar and posted a song online about Slack, answering the Slack call, which was very humorous. And I think that helps a lot too. People know that you can still smile despite being real. So, okay, let me bring it back to the theme of the panel for a second. I'm going to, now that all of you have met 3 of the living members in our bar room, I'm going to introduce you to one of the not so living members. So this is King Camp Gillette. It's a great name, King Camp Gillette. He was born in 1855 in Wisconsin, and he's a drummer, which is not a musician in those days. In the 19th century, a drummer was someone who drummed up business. So he was a traveling salesman. And he worked for a company that would become Crown Cork and Seal. So he was selling disposable bottle caps and disposable bottle stoppers. So he had that sort of in mind. And in 1895, he actually is in Boston, and he conceives of the disposable razor blade with a locking handle, and he patents it. And it takes him 6 grueling years running up and down the coast trying to find someone who will listen to him about this wonderful idea he has. And he finally runs into a guy named William Nickerson, who's an MIT grad, and I think a genius. He could conceive of automation equipment in his head and never write it down and build it. And he builds for Gillette a machine that takes thin sheets of steel and sharpens them. And in 1901, they launched the business. They're brilliant marketeers. Every American soldier in World War I gets a free razor and razor blades. And by 1918, they're churning out 22 miles a day of sharpened metal. So this is what he was trying to disrupt. Okay, this is a handcrafted forged metal shaving blade. It's really a weapon of mass destruction. They were difficult to use. You could see this, but I'm not sure you would really want to be doing that much. And most of the gents in the 19th century agreed. Some of them had this. If you used it every day, you had to strop it and try to keep it sharp. But even then, you had to send it out to a professional to be sharpened. So you either did it yourself, or you had whiskers, or most people went to a barbershop. And Gillette was very successful, and he eliminated most of these. Not everyone. You probably all have a great-grandfather who stuck with his throughout his entire life. But in the process of disrupting that business, he also did something else which he didn't need to do, and that is he got rid of hundreds and perhaps thousands of barbers and barbershops. He took away arguably their highest value add and most profitable service. So the events in his life were very Schumpeterian, as we said at the beginning. See a product that's ripe for disruption, create an innovation, disrupt an existing economic cycle, right? But when the handcrafted razor blades and the barbershops went away, there was a better solution that existed, right? Creation came before destruction. So now skip ahead to March of 2020. I've been traveling for 10 days. I get home, I need a haircut. I land in Logan the day after Massachusetts is locked down, so there are no barbershops open. April comes, no barbershop. May comes, no barbershop. June, I don't know what we're going to do. I'm locked down here with 4 other people. I'll tell you a secret. A couple of them may use a little hair coloring, so there's a sense of urgency going on in my house. And in June, finally, we have to be creative, or kludgy, maybe a better word, and have a workaround. So we invite a hairdresser into our kitchen. We wipe it all down. We all mask up, and she does the hair. Now, since barbershops are now open to some degree, we don't have to push the creativity much more than that. But I'm sure she would have a mobile truck here if we thought they were gone away forever, and there'd be all kinds of creativity coming into this space. But my point is this: the disruption happened before we had a solution. So we're running around like crazy trying to figure out how to be creative to fix this problem that we have. So my question to the panel, and I'll start with Brent this time, and then we'll go to Brenna and Jane, is how in your own business, you talked a little bit about keeping your group together, but how have you needed to be creative around your business and your business model to handle disruptions that have occurred whether you wanted them to or not?
Yeah, I mean, look, absolutely. Our business, the business of higher education fundraising, is a relationship-based business. Our 9 years, 10 years of technology investment was designed to support workflows of how fundraising has been done, which in a lot of cases meant that you got on a plane, you identified the donor you wanted to meet, you got on a plane, you went and saw them, you got to know them in person. So we had all of these tools and things that we've built to support identifying the Brown alumni in Chicago that you should be prioritizing, and then planning a trip to go see them, and then having mapping to get you from the airport really efficiently to their office, and then quickly use your phone to record your conversation with them after the fact. And that workflow is not happening very much these days. So what is happening is Zoom conversations and new approaches to engaging donors, both one-to-many, but also one-to-one. And so we quickly, for example, did an integration with Zoom to be able to support some of the things that were really had been happening, but were sort of the exception, and then they became the rule really, really quickly overnight. I think more broadly, so there's some tactical short-term things that you can do. I think long-term, there is a much bigger question that we're helping our customers navigate, which is, what's the future of a fundraising operation post this time period, when both donors and staff alike are having a decade worth of technology adoption and new strategies being thrust upon them? Are we ever going to go back to the world where we've got a bunch of fundraisers that live in Providence who have to fly from Providence, connect in Chicago to get to Hong Kong to go meet donors? Does that really make sense? And if it doesn't, what is the future of the org chart going to look like? What are the implications for remote work for our sector that has traditionally been very campus oriented? The Northwestern fundraisers are up in Evanston. The U Chicago fundraisers go to the office every day. What might it mean if we could access remote work and engage our global alumni community in a more hybrid approach? What could that do from an efficiency perspective? And then obviously, what might vendors like Evertrue do to adjust our offerings to align with that new reality? So it's really, there were some short-term obvious things like integrate with Zoom, but it's the longer-term questions and the pace at which those longer-term changes are made that really get me excited about the next 10 years and the innovation, recognizing, as Jean said, that it's incredibly sad that this is the context that we're operating in, that it took this kind of outside event to force innovation, but it would be a shame on all of us if we weren't trying to stay optimistic and react to that and really control what we can control.
I think you're up, yeah.
I think what's been really interesting in the industry I work in has been not so much innovation around new things necessarily, but the adoption of proven technologies from other industries, specifically things from retail and primarily retail into new ways of managing things in the public way or on transit or in the hospitality industry. So for example, as cities and states have moved into the phases of reopening to restart their economies, we're working with a number of partners in Chicago and other cities to approach reopening in a way that allows people to come together in a safe and socially distant way, to be able to sort of monitor health and provide a safe environment. And there's sort of tools and techniques coming from two industries that have really helped us do that. And some are coming from sort of the design and architecture field. And you're seeing examples of this in there. One of the things that's nice is how easy they are to adopt because they're low tech, and these are the sort of painting of the 6-foot circles that you're seeing, et cetera. And it's amazing, frankly, how easily many of us won't cross a line. Without being told, right? We'll follow an arrow, we'll stand on a dot, we won't cross a line, and the ability to manage sort of traffic flow the same way we do with our cars on a highway. We're more than happy to do traveling down a street or in a line at an airport, et cetera, and that creates a lot of the necessary space for people to create, the proper distance as we're out and about. So we're working with a number of architecture firms to recreate the flow of people in public spaces, museums, parks, entertainment zones to make them safe for people to come back to. And then there's a role for proven technologies that have been used in malls, et cetera, and everything from, analytics, video analytics, et cetera, to help people and to help the operators of those locations control the number of people in a space, help them travel through, understand why people are bunching and where they're bunching. And these are all things that, frankly, sort of malls and high-end entertainment places like Disney World have used for years. We haven't employed them in public spaces or smaller neighborhood retail zones before, and that's what we're taking on now. And you do have to think pretty creatively about the business model to support that, because frankly, something that Disney World can afford to do, a smaller entertainment zone can't, if you don't think about the value of the data or the number of businesses that might come together to create a collaborative business model to afford that. And it's not that they don't know how to use the analytics or they don't know what the technology means for them. It's just they don't have the commercial power that a Disney World does. You have to rethink the business model. So that's been pretty interesting. And the other thing that's a little different about that is, I don't know that people go to Disney World with a presumption of privacy, because it's not the public way. You do walk down Main Street wherever with a presumption of privacy. And so as you're deploying technology that is monitoring, where you walk either by camera or perhaps picking up your cell phone signal, et cetera, you do need to think pretty clearly about how to manage that data and how to communicate with the public that you are doing these things. And I think some of the conversations around that are changing, because we have health reasons to do this now. But that doesn't mean we should take for granted the fact that people, residents of our cities are just okay with being monitored as they walk around their cities. We do need to be mindful about the presumption of privacy, how people feel about their personal data, and have these very challenging conversations about putting technologies in place in our cities, in our parks, in our museums, et cetera, and how we manage that data. But those are some of the things we're seeing emerge, which is a really interesting adaptation of proven technologies, but for very new reasons.
And I'll add on to that idea. I think one of the things that we're really seeing in our industry, so in the construction industry, and it sounds like in a lot of other industries as well, what we're acknowledging is that the technology has existed, right? This was not a technological problem. The technology has existed. What the problem was, it was an adaptive challenge. People were not motivated to use these technologies for their specific use cases or in their specific business size, or maybe the business model didn't work, but fundamentally it's not a technical problem. All the technology is there. It's been there. Zoom wasn't created on March 13th. It's been there. We just all weren't using it. And so I think that for us at least, we have been really thinking about how do we continue to have conversations with our general contractors at that emotional adaptive level. How do we get them to continue to adopt new technologies, to be comfortable with what has been, yes, Eric, you're absolutely right, an external event that none of us had control over. We certainly wouldn't have wished for it, but it has built, or it has allowed for a new flexibility in our thinking and a new adoption of new technologies in a way that we are just trying to think, like, how do we continue to tap into that adaptive, creative energy of our general contractors? How do we show them, having a Zoom call as a pre-site visit call, to do a site visit walkthrough on a Zoom call is actually creating incredible operational efficiencies in your business. You're no longer driving a half hour to get there, an hour to walk through, and a half hour to drive back. You're doing everything in 30 minutes. Like that is providing real value to your company. Why that wasn't the case before is kind of like what was the mental hurdle that they were able to make right in this second, and how do we continue to speak to them in a way that allows them to keep evolving in that way, like that it's not scary, that it really was just an adaptive problem. It wasn't a tech problem.
It's a really good point. I remember an article in I think it was the New York Times Magazine a number of years ago, which had to do with the collection of data from customers that allowed some store, I won't say it, to figure out that somebody's daughter was pregnant because she was buying the things that a pregnant person buys, and they just knew by the data. And the reason it was so important to these stores is because there are only a few times in a person's life. They get married, sometimes when they take a new job and move to a different city, when they have a baby, when their world is disrupted. And they're willing to Jean's point, try things that they try new brands in this particular case, but try new experiences that they've never tried before because everything's become unstuck. And then you get back in a groove and you sort of buy the same two cereals and you do all the things that you're used to. So thinking of this as an opportunity where people are unstuck and then thinking about, well, is there any way to keep this going? Because using Zoom is good, but there may be other things that come along in the next year that we could, if we could just get them to try it, just get them to do it a little bit differently. Now, I didn't have an annual physical, but I had a telemedicine visit with my doctor. I think we covered 99% of what we probably needed for me to go over there and spend an hour and a half. Now, eventually you got to see people physically, but I just wonder how that really applies to this question of remote work. And I'd love to get your thoughts just quickly on, we know there are pluses with remote work. I assume there are some minuses. And when we get back to whatever the new normal is, how are you you've been unstuck now, how are you going to use this new tool? You're going to continue to use it as it is now? You're going to pull it back a little bit? How is it going to work in your mind?
Can I comment quickly that I think one of the main things we've been trying to say over and over is this is not normal remote work. I've got two kids right over here that I've been going on mute right away because I don't want them to distract the panel. It's like, this is not normal. And so I'm hopeful that if we can all get through this and make this work to some level, that post-vaccine or post whatever the next chapter is, this is going to be an incredible step forward for families. It's going to be a step forward for supporting companies that, like ours, have so much work to do as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Being able to think about the world as a talent pool, about the United States as a talent pool, not having it to be centered around 330 Congress Street in Boston is refreshing for me. We've already begun exploring more proactive recruitment of diverse networks. I mean, for me, this hasn't come up too much, but the George Floyd issues and tragedy and everything around that has been way harder to navigate as a leader and I think with my team than COVID and remote work. And so, that's just one thing I want to put out there, that, those are issues. COVID was thrust upon us, totally external force, but around racial justice, inequity, these are things that we just have to recognize and create. There's no vaccine that's going to create equity and inclusion overnight. The only thing that's going to do that is a ton of hard work, long-term planning, changing our networks. So those are the things that I think I'm hopeful that out of two tragedies and this confluence of events, one natural, one societal, that there might be an opportunity to have both remote work and diversity, equity, inclusion as being some of the legacies of 2020 that are actually quite positive.
I know, or Jean, any thoughts on remote work in terms of, right, that's a pretty good answer, so. But,
yeah, that's a great answer. Nothing to add.
You plan to use it more or less? Has it been a net plus, a net negative? What are you missing in remote work that you used to have, for example?
I think what's been missing in the whole discussion about remote work and I don't want to miss what Brent said about George Floyd and sort of finally the coming to the forefront of the social justice conversation, because that is actually the topic that is the priority, right? The pandemic will be managed and addressed, right? And to Jean's point, the world has not ended, right? We continue on. The social justice issue is the one that's going to take the hard work. But on the topic of the work from home issue, I've been sort of struck by the number of articles in the paper since we all came home of, we're all going to work from home now, and the number of companies that send everybody home forever. And I sit here and Brett, if we had been smart, we would have put your 2 kids on a Zoom with my 2 kids, and that might have helped because mine are off to the side too. And
not too late.
It's right, exactly. We should have been smarter. We just would have needed some Minecraft or something to keep them all busy. And I think the entire work from home, and you're finally now seeing some of the studies about the impact that it has had on, and primarily, frankly, on the productivity of women as the primary caregivers, not to at all discount what Brent's doing, keeping his kids out of the picture, because there's plenty of dads who are suffering that too, because someone is taking care of those kids. And there's been a lack of discussion around the fact that you can't work from home if you're taking care of your kids at the same time, because they're home too. So, and frankly, the less affluent you are, the bigger a problem that is. So it has all sorts of social ramifications. And I think it's been a very sort of undefined and unsubtle conversation. And we would be better served, and I think, Brent, you did a great job. You kept saying that what you hoped for going forward as a company is that you would be able to think about all of these numbers of issues. And I think the best outcome of this for any company, big or small, is the ability to rethink what the right hybrid situation is for them. That no longer do you have to sort of make one decision or the other, right? We're in an office where we work from home. We recruit in just the Northeast, or we recruit in the whole world, right? That we now have the flexibility. To Jean's point before, we're essentially cultural barriers. There was nothing stopping us from doing, Zoom-driven remote inspections before, except we just didn't, right? We had cultural barriers that said we couldn't because we'd always done it before that way. And so for all of these innovations that we're finding now, from our ability to work from home because we had to, and now we can, our ability to use telemedicine to see our doctor up to a certain point when there are things, yes, where we'll have to go in. It gives us the ability to think more broadly about how we do everything and use that thinking to say, my end goal is a more diverse, more flexible, more enlightened, available workforce, however you want to define that for your company. How do I get there, right? What's the means that helps me achieve that? And we kind of have a blank slate for that right now. And how do I get there? And I hope to heck that includes making sure that there's available childcare, because that's killing people. So I'm all with Brent that it gives us a chance to think about all those steps for our companies.
Yeah, you good? I think this the conversation about opening schools is turned on what you two just talked about, because for those of us who don't have kids in school anymore, it's about health, right? And that's the focus. We don't want to make kids sick. But when you listen to parents who both work and are trying to work and raise a family, and they had to homeschool, there's all kinds of other factors, social and mental health factors, and the kids, in a lot of cases, kids get one of their best meals at school. There are all these other kinds of things that are going on in this equation, which are related to COVID but unrelated to COVID, right? If the social stuff starts to bubble up, and maybe it's an opportunity. Let's hope it's an opportunity for us to try to fix some of these things while we can. The window closes fast. But I am encouraged by the fact there's an article in the New Yorker this month that the bubonic plague brought about the Renaissance. So if you want to think in big, mega historical terms, there can be lots of good that comes out of these really hard times. To Jean's very first point, we got to try to keep that in mind. The world didn't end, and the Enlightenment came, and we're all here today. So, all right. we're over an hour now, so let me just kind of wrap up with one final question. I think some of you have touched on this already, but what's next? What's next in a world where we don't really know yet what the new normal looks like? We have to make some assumptions, but everyone's got to move their organizations forward. Besides having enough cash every day, what's next in terms of your thinking about how you move your own organization forward? So, Brenna, can I start with you?
We've been pleasantly surprised by the fact that our model around co-innovation is more necessary now for the partners that we work with in cities than it probably was before the issues that we're dealing with now came to the forefront. What's going to change for us, I think, is actually the challenges that are facing our cities. Right now, everything is about the health challenges our cities are facing because of the pandemic, and the fact that some cities are approaching that recovery with a stronger lens on equity, which is fantastic, and that has implications for our work. And you mentioned the sort of opportunity for a second renaissance, and that is actually language that Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago uses, not referring back to the Italian Renaissance, but Chicago's first Renaissance in Bronzeville. So that language is out and about in the world, which is exciting to think about it that way. What's interesting is, there was a global migration towards urban centers before the pandemic. And it was actually moving towards very, very large urban centers, right? The mega cities that are growing across the world. And there is some very early data that this is changing and it's also changing who is migrating. So you are beginning to see some changes of, frankly, more wealthy people moving out of very large urban centers to secondary urban centers, right? Because they still want the benefits of urban culture, et cetera, but they don't want the risks that they now see in highly dense urban centers. And that has some real implications to the challenges that both those secondary cities will face as they take on new people, and the challenges that will be faced by those people that choose to stay in the large sort of existing urban centers. And that will have some implications to our work. In terms of the solutions that those cities need, how we will be able to serve the people who remain in large cities and hope to achieve sort of equity of service and opportunity in those cities, and frankly, how we make sure that some of the issues that have been faced for generations in our big cities aren't replicated in those second and third tier cities as they grow. So I think this has had implications to urban trends that were shaping the globe. And City Tech, frankly, is in a really interesting position to help hopefully address those challenges and frankly, not repeat history. Because we're smarter now, hopefully, as a people and can prevent that from happening. It's a pretty exciting time for our work. And our hope is, frankly, that we're up to the challenge.
Do you want to follow the answer, Eric? Sorry.
Yeah, geez, go ahead. No, I'm good.
So, you know what? For me, this moment is really a moment in which we all are questioning the assumptions of man-made systems. And that, to me, is an incredibly powerful moment when we can all look at, in the context of George Floyd's murder and race, we can look at what is a man-made system, right? Race, there is no difference between our races. There's no biological difference between our races. Race is a man-made construct, right? It is the child of racism. That's one of my favorite authors, Ta-Nehisi Coates says. It's the child. Race is the child of racism. Racism is a man-made system. And so whether that is in that example around race, whether it's in cities and how we construct cities, whether it's in the way that we educate or populate, or all of these things that we have created, man and women have created, this moment is hopeful to me because we are questioning the assumptions of those systems. And that's really exciting to me. And I just hope we keep doing it.
Can I ask Jane, just to follow up into all of you, how comfortable, Brent mentioned this a little bit, but how comfortable or in what way can you engage with your company around these issues, which is comfortable for you and that is positive for the company and sends the right messages?
Well, I think just in that way. I mean, really separating out in the highest level, right? So this is not, it is an incredibly emotionally charged topic specifically around George Floyd, or even, working remote, the assumptions that we've made about gender equality. Like, we've made a ton of assumptions, a ton. And it is okay to question them, and that we probably haven't questioned them because of our loyalties to either the people that made them or our own families or our own. There's so much tied into that can be super emotional, can be super triggering. And to say that, to give people the space to say, like, it's okay to question the assumptions. And so, and model that behavior. And look for it in myself, look for it in the systems that we're creating, look for the overall, either at the city level, the state level, the federal level, the global level. You can zoom up and down the system, but really just giving everyone permission to question the assumptions.
And I don't think it's going to be comfortable, Eric. I don't think it's going to be comfortable at all. I don't think it should be comfortable. And creating the space so that people can have uncomfortable conversations, super important, big challenge right now that I'm trying to get better at. And at the same time, it's going to take years to address any given company's issues, decades or centuries to address society's issues. And so it's how do you remain really impatient while at the same time recognizing there's no quick fix? And what are the things that we can control as leaders that we can change next Monday at our Monday meeting? And then what are the things that are going to take 6 months, 6 years, 6 decades to address? And how do you balance some of those issues while at the same time making sure you've got enough cash in the bank and that you can do payroll and that your board's happy and all of those other things? But just focused on what the shareholders need, is not, you can't do that unless you're taking a more holistic approach in 2020. I just don't think there's another way to do it.
Your answers to me, interesting. The very first entrepreneur in the book is Eli Whitney. And Eli Whitney, as you know, went down and designed a cotton gin. And it changed the fortunes of America. And one of the things it did, unanticipated, was it made slaves more valuable because cotton was more valuable. I went through all of Eli Whitney's writing. He was a Northerner. He came from Massachusetts and went to Yale and then went down to South Carolina and Georgia. And I went through all of his writing, everything that he wrote. And he never once mentioned slavery, ever, in any of his writings. And given his impact, it's just bizarre. And so when I got through with him, I thought, well, maybe the secret to entrepreneurship is you just keep your head down. You only focus on what you're doing every day, on your business model, on your business. And I think what you just said was not true. It's not true at all, right? You have an obligation beyond simply trying to make your numbers for your investors to also do other kinds of things that have positive impact. Am I right? You agree?
Look, there probably are people that still take that approach. I'm just not going to be one of them. And I think I just don't think we can pretend like, at least in our context, people are coming to work for a paycheck and they just want to do their job and go home, and whatever happens in society, none of your business. I mean, that's just not, the intersection of work and politics and life and society and justice, it is accelerating. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. And look, right now, I grew up in Iowa, and the reason that mask wearing is accelerating in Iowa is because retailers are making it so, not in that case a government mandate. And so I think it's an example where business leaders are leaders. They're not just leaders of business, they're leaders of communities, they're leaders of their tribes, they're leaders of their sectors. And there are days I wish it were simpler sometimes, but it's not, and I think we've all got to step up and do our part.
Great answer, everyone.
And I would just say, again, you probably can tell that I'm like a systems thinker. I tend to zoom up and down. And for the good of our society, our country, it is just so clear that we are all suffering by this inequity. We may or may not realize it. We may or not want to speak to it. It is, of course, more clear when you see something like George Floyd being murdered on television. But we are all suffering if we do not have the biodiversity that we need in our communities and our businesses. It is just, there's no example in nature where you survive without it. And so if you want to think of it through that lens, you can still keep the business focus and say, if you want better results, you need more diversity. You need more diversity of perspective. You need more diversity. That is, if you look at natural systems, those are the ones that thrive.
And it's true from a technology perspective as well. We know that technologies, in and of itself, may be agnostic, but its implementation never is. And the Eli Whitney example is perfect for that, right? The cotton gin was perfectly agnostic, sitting alone in its garage or wherever it was built, but it wasn't once you put it into play. And the more diverse your team is, from requirements through design through implementation, the more you'll be aware of the biases that are being put into play from, the moment you sketch whatever it is on a napkin through to the end of implementation. And you need to know that they are there in order to address them. And we've seen time and time again where that hasn't been the case. I doubt that the cotton gin was first.
Right. Well, we don't have time for this question, but I wonder how different the internet would be if women had designed it instead of men.
A couple of really good examples of how it would have been different.
Yeah. So we've got some, it sounds like some younger entrepreneurs who have tuned in. And I've changed gears just a little bit. They've come to you like an author and sat down at your desk and said, "Hey, give me some advice. Given everything that's going on, would you launch a business today? Would you go back and try to get your MBA? As a young entrepreneur, go work for a big company where there's a little bit of safety and learn some skills. What would be your advice to an up and coming entrepreneur? In any order you'd like."
My advice would be to learn as much as you can working for someone else, and then go out on your own. I think that, that's what I would say. Don't stay too long. Don't get trapped by the golden handcuffs. But certainly learning on someone else's time it can be incredibly helpful. It's like the Cliff Notes for a lot of the technical stuff that you need to learn.
You came out of Cooper, right, and went right to work for a boutique architect, and so
I
had to do a little bit of everything. So you got dropped into the pool, but it was manageable for you, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I would agree with that. I'll admit my bias here, right? I came out of graduate school and spent quite a bit of time at IBM. But I think there's value to starting somewhere that is established, whatever that is in your given field. You can learn a lot of the tools and see a lot of the history that has built whatever industry it is that you're in. And I think it's good to see that. And it's important, I think, to learn the foundations that built your industry, even if you're not going to add to that foundation. If you're going to break away from that, you need to know what it is you're breaking away from. And it's helpful to learn the processes and techniques and tools and methods. Or frankly, you may actually not know what you have to diversify away from if you don't know what's already there.
Yeah, I think I would just say, if you're an entrepreneur, we all tend to get really focused on our idea or our solution. And we just got to check that and really stay focused on the problem. I mean, the problems that we're trying to address at Evertrue are literally identical to the problems that existed 10 years ago. Our understanding of what the real issues are and what the solutions to those issues might be has evolved greatly as we've learned more. If I could go back in time, I wish I would have just sat down and interviewed 25. I should have done what Eric did, except make it about our sector and just go ask the same questions to 25 different fundraising leaders at 25 different colleges, and to really understand from their perspective what are the challenges that they feel, and to also have the humility to accept that if my idea for my really cool thing doesn't align with what they actually care about, then you just got to set it aside. So one of my favorite pieces of advice, I give it to people all the time, no one takes me up on it, so I'll just keep sharing it, is start a blog or start a podcast about whatever space you want. So if I'm going to go start Sweeten, 2.0, I'm going to go interview a bunch of contractors. I'm going to build an audience around the contractors. Maybe nobody listens to the podcast or reads my blog, doesn't matter, because I'm building my network. I'm building empathy. I'm learning how they talk and what they say and their challenges. It doesn't matter if it's that or healthcare or city innovation. Start a blog, start a podcast. Everybody wants to be on a blog or a podcast. We're on this session today, right? I mean, people are willing to be featured, and you can learn so much in doing that relative to saying, can I take you out for coffee or can I pick your brain? So even though you're picking their brains, do it via podcast or a blog, and I think it'll be worth your while.
I'll just add that is a fantastic idea, which I did do, but I did it while I had a job.
Even better, side hustles before they were side hustles. Yeah.
When I got my MBA, it was 1983. If I had told my classmates I was going to be an entrepreneur, they would have thought I was going to open a French bakery. That is not something you were going to go off and do. The way the world worked then was that you went off and did something, and you discovered a problem or a better way to do it. You couldn't convince anyone in your company to help you invest in it, so you went off and you founded your own company and you tried to solve it. So the problem always came first, the solution came first, and in order to do that, I think, as Brenna said, you've got to be part of something and understand how it works and how it's broken. And once you know where the pain point is, if you're interested in creative, then you can go off and innovate. And the idea that the first thing I do is get a partner, and then we go in search of a problem, just seems backwards to me. I know it can work, and I don't want to, if that's the way it worked for you, fantastic. But for the most part, the old advice used to be in your 20s, you'd work for the best companies you could. If you could work for Google, or if you could work for United Technologies, you did that, and you learned how good companies were successful. And then in your 30s, before you got too high a mortgage payment or too many kids, you could experiment. You could go off and do your own thing. And then by the time you're in your mid or late 30s, you've got big company experience, you've got startup experience, and you sort of set the path for the rest of your career. Now, that doesn't really work that way, but that would be the idea. But it all starts with getting smart about something that you're really, really interested in. Right? Otherwise, you end up making, smart bike locks, which are okay, but they're not quite the same as Uber, right? So, you want to try to pick the problems that are a little bit bigger, that are interesting. The only way to do that is to be involved in some kind of an industry. So, and hang out with good people, But get the best boss you can, not necessarily the best company you can. Good bosses are really important in terms of development. So. Okay, we are coming close. Is there anything anyone wants to add? Good. All right. I want to thank everyone then. I want to thank everyone who's out there. We can't see you, so we're not sure who's out there exactly. I see some questions that came in, but thank you. Thank the panelists. Thank Laura and Kate and City Tech Collaborative for hosting us today. And for all of you out there, we are 4 people who try to build community. So we are everywhere. We got websites, we got blogs, we got Twitter accounts, or LinkedIn. If you'd like to follow up with any of us, it's pretty easy to do. Just drop us a note, and you become part of our community. We can look forward to that. So Brenna and Jean and Brent, thank you very much. Have a great rest of Friday and great weekend.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everyone.
a great conversation, Eric.
Thank
This
you.
is wonderful. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everybody.